The scorching New Mexico sun beat down on Olivia Winters as she frantically stuffed her few belongings into a worn leather satchel. Her hands trembled, not from the heat but from fear of the man who had declared to the entire town of Socorro that she would be his bride, whether she wanted it or not. "I won't let him take what isn't his to claim," she whispered to herself, tucking a stray auburn curl behind her ear. Outside her small adobe home, the sounds of horses approaching made her heart leap into her throat. Socorro, New Mexico, 1878, was not kind to a woman alone. Olivia had learned that lesson the hard way after her father's passing 3 months prior. At 22, she was now responsible for the small plot of land her father had cultivated, and apparently, in the eyes of Harold Blackburn, the wealthiest cattle rancher in the territory, she was also his for the taking. A loud knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Winters, I know you're in there." Blackburn's voice boomed through the wooden door. "Time's up for deciding. The wedding will be this Sunday, and I expect you to be ready." Olivia pressed herself against the far wall, willing herself to become invisible. "I've already given you my answer, Mr. Blackburn," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "It was no yesterday, it's no today, and it will be no tomorrow." The door rattled as Blackburn slammed his fist against it. "You don't understand your position, girl. Your father left you with nothing but debts. I'm offering you protection, a place in society. Don't be foolish. My father left me this land free and clear." "Your lies won't change that," she replied, though she knew her position was precarious. The deed was locked away in the bank, and the banker, Mr. Phillips, was firmly in Blackburn's pocket. "We'll see about that," Blackburn growled. "I'll give you until sundown tomorrow to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee the safety of this hovel you call home." His boots crunched on the dry earth as he retreated, and Olivia released the breath she'd been holding. She had until tomorrow to figure something out, to find a way to escape or to fight back. Neither prospect seemed promising in a town where Harold Blackburn's influence reached every corner. Dusk was falling as Olivia slipped out of her home, keeping to the shadows. The general store would be closing soon, and she needed supplies if she was going to flee. As she hurried down the dusty street, the sound of raucous laughter spilled from the saloon, a reminder of how out of place she was in this rough frontier town. Inside the store, Mr. Jenkins looked up from his ledger, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Winters, don't often see you out this late. Just need a few things, Mr. Jenkins," she said, gathering flour, beans, and coffee. "Might be doing some traveling soon." The storekeeper's eyes narrowed. "Heard Blackburn's been making his intentions known. Thought you might be preparing for a wedding, not a journey." "The only wedding I'd attend with Harold Blackburn would be his funeral to someone else," Olivia replied tartly, immediately regretting her candor. Jenkins chuckled nervously. "Best not to say such things too loudly, Miss Winters. Blackburn has ears everywhere, and he doesn't take kindly to rejection." As Jenkins tallied her purchases, the bell over the door jingled, announcing another customer. Olivia kept her gaze down, hoping it wasn't one of Blackburn's men. "Evening," a deep voice drawled, and something in its timbre made Olivia look up. The man who entered was tall and lean, with the easy stance of someone comfortable in his own skin. His face was tanned by the sun and partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Olivia could make out keen blue eyes that surveyed the store with quiet attentiveness. "Evening, stranger," Jenkins replied. "What can I help you with?" "Just passing through, need some provisions," the man said. Then his gaze fell on Olivia. For a moment their eyes met, and Olivia felt an unexpected jolt of something. Not fear, which was unusual given her current state of mind. "Madam," He tipped his hat slightly, before turning his attention to the shelves. Olivia quickly paid for her goods and gathered her packages, eager to return home before full dark settled. As she hurried toward the door, the stranger stepped aside politely. "Careful out there," he said softly. "Seems like trouble's brewing." Olivia paused, struck by his perceptiveness. "Trouble's always brewing in Sakura for someone," she replied cautiously. A half-smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "True enough. Name's Kieran Gray, by the way." "Olivia Winters," she responded automatically, then regretted sharing even that small piece of information with a stranger. "Miss Winters," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Stay safe." Something in his manner, a certain watchfulness, perhaps told Olivia that Kieran Gray wasn't just another drifter passing through. But she had no time to ponder the mystery of the stranger. She needed to prepare for what came next. Dawn broke with Olivia still awake, having spent the night alternating between packing and pacing. She'd made her decision. She would ride to Santa Fe, where her mother's sister lived. It was a long journey for a woman alone, but staying meant either marrying Blackburn or facing his wrath. She was securing her meager belongings to her father's old mare when hoofbeats approached from the main road. Tensing, she reached for the rifle she'd propped against the fence, but relaxed slightly when she saw it wasn't Blackburn or his men. It was the stranger from the store, Kieran Gray. He rode a handsome chestnut gelding, and in the bright morning light, Olivia could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a face that looked as though it smiled easily, though it was serious now. "Miss Winters," he called, slowing his horse as he approached. "Leaving so soon?" Olivia straightened, keeping one hand near her rifle. "What business is it of yours, Mr. Gray?" He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "None, I suppose. Except I happened to overhear some talk in the saloon last night, about a certain rancher and his unwelcome advances toward a lady who's made her feelings clear." Heat rose to Olivia's cheeks. News travels fast in Sakura. "Especially when the news involves Harold Blackburn throwing his weight around," Kieran observed, leading his horse closer. "I gather you're not interested in becoming Mrs. Blackburn?" "I'd sooner marry a rattlesnake," Olivia replied firmly. Kieran's mouth twitched with amusement. "At least with a rattlesnake you get a warning before it strikes." He glanced at her packed mare. "Where are you headed?" Olivia hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, especially not to a man she'd just met. But something about Kieran Gray's direct gaze made her want to believe he meant no harm. "Santa Fe," she finally said. "I have family there." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "That's a rough journey for someone traveling alone, especially with Blackburn likely to send men after you once he realizes you've fled." "I don't have much choice," Olivia said, securing the last of her bundles. "He's given me until sundown to accept his proposal." "There's always a choice," Kieran said quietly. Then, more briskly, "I'm headed towards Santa Fe myself. Might be safer if we traveled together, at least until we're well out of Blackburn's territory." Olivia studied him skeptically. "And why would you offer that, Mr. Gray? What's in it for you?" "Let's just say I've seen what men like Blackburn do to get what they want," he replied, a shadow passing over his features. "And I don't much care for it." Before Olivia could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching made them both tense. Kieran moved swiftly, leading his horse behind Olivia's small barn. "Get inside," he urged quietly. "Let me handle this." Against her better judgment, Olivia found herself complying, retreating into her home but keeping the door cracked open to watch. 3 riders approached, and Olivia's heart sank as she recognized Blackburn himself at the lead, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. They pulled up in front of her house, and Blackburn dismounted, his substantial frame moving with surprising agility for a man in his 50s. "Olivia," he called out, striding toward the house. "I see you're making preparations. Smart girl, getting ready for your new life at the ranch." Kieran stepped out from behind the barn, his stance casual but alert. "Morning, gentlemen," he called. Blackburn turned, surprise giving way to suspicion as he sized up the newcomer. "And who might you be?" "Just a traveler passing through," Kieran replied easily. "Was asking the lady here for directions when you arrived." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "Well, you've got them now, I assume. Best be on your way. Miss Winters and I have private matters to discuss." Kieran made no move to leave. "Funny thing is, I got the impression the lady wasn't interested in discussing anything with you." The atmosphere shifted instantly, tension crackling like static before a storm. Blackburn's men straightened in their saddles, hands moving subtly toward their weapons. "This isn't your concern, stranger," Blackburn said, his voice dangerously low. "Miss Winters is my fiancée, and we have wedding arrangements to finalize." "Is that so?" Kieran looked toward the house where Olivia stood partially concealed by the door. "That true, Miss Winters?" "You agree to this engagement?" Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped fully into the doorway. "No," she said clearly. "I've told Mr. Blackburn repeatedly that I will not marry him." Blackburn's face reddened. "You're being foolish, girl. You need protection, and I'm offering it." "Sounds to me like she already said no," Kieran observed mildly. But there was steel beneath his casual tone, and Olivia saw Blackburn register it. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Blackburn laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I don't know who you think you are, Cowboy, but you're meddling in affairs you don't understand. Miss Winters' father owed me a considerable sum. I'm generously offering to forgive that debt in exchange for her hand." "My father owed you nothing," Olivia retorted. "You're lying to pressure me, and I won't have it." "Check the county records if you don't believe me," Blackburn challenged. "Phillips has all the documentation." "Phillips, who happens to be your cousin," Olivia shot back. "Convenient, isn't it?" Kieran watched this exchange with interest, his eyes shrewd. "Seems like there's some disagreement about the facts," he observed. "Perhaps this matter needs to be settled properly, through legal channels." Blackburn's patience visibly thinned. "And who exactly are you to suggest anything?" "You're nothing but a drifter, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." With deliberate calm, Kieran reached inside his vest and pulled out what appeared to be a badge. "Kieran Gray, U.S. Marshal," he said, and Olivia felt her eyes widen in surprise. "And ensuring that citizens aren't coerced or threatened is very much my business, Mr. Blackburn." The revelation changed the dynamic instantly. Blackburn's men exchanged uneasy glances, while their employer struggled to maintain his composure. "Marshal or not, you have no jurisdiction over private arrangements between myself and Miss Winters," Blackburn insisted, though with less confidence than before. "Harassment and coercion are matters I can certainly look into," Kieran replied, "as is the validity of any debts you claim are owed." "Perhaps we should ride into town together, speak with the judge." Blackburn stared at Kieran with undisguised hatred before turning to Olivia. "This isn't over," he said. "No one defies me in my own territory." "Yet here we are," Kieran remarked pleasantly. "Miss Winters has made her wishes clear. I suggest you respect them." With a final glare, Blackburn mounted his horse. "You've made a mistake crossing me, Marshal. Both of you have." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped off, his men following closely. In the sudden quiet after their departure, Olivia found herself trembling, the full impact of the confrontation hitting her now that the immediate danger had passed. Kieran approached her cautiously. "Are you all right?" Olivia nodded, then frowned at him. "You're really a marshal." "You weren't just saying that," Kieran smiled slightly, returning the badge to his vest. I am. Though I wasn't entirely forthcoming about why I'm in Sakuro, I've been tracking a gang that's been robbing banks and stage coaches throughout the territory. Have reason to believe they're planning something in this area. And you just happened to be in the store when I was there? Olivia asked skeptically. I go where information leads me, he replied. When I heard talk about Blackburn pressuring a young woman into marriage, it seemed worth looking into. Men who abuse their power often have other secrets. Olivia considered this. You think Blackburn is connected to these robberies? Kieran shrugged. I don't know yet. But I do know he's not going to let this confrontation go easily. You're still in danger, Miss Winters. The truth of his words sank in, and Olivia glanced at her packed mare. Then I should leave immediately. Blackburn will have men watching the roads, Kieran pointed out. And traveling alone is still risky. What do you suggest? Olivia asked, suddenly feeling very tired. The prospect of fleeing, of starting over somewhere new, was daunting enough without the added complication of Blackburn's vengeful pursuit. Kieran thought for a moment. I have duties here I can't abandon, but I can offer you protection while I complete my investigation. After that, if you still wish to go to Santa Fe, I'll escort you there myself. And in the meantime, Blackburn isn't going to just give up. No, he's not, Kieran agreed. Which is why we need to find out what he's really after. I doubt it's just your hand in marriage, Miss Winters. Olivia frowned. What else could it be? Your land, perhaps. Is there something valuable about this property that would make Blackburn so determined to control it? Olivia looked around at the modest homestead her father had built. It wasn't large and the soil was decent but nothing exceptional. There's nothing special here that I know of. We have a good well, but so do many properties in the area. Well, there's something, Kieran said decisively. And I intend to find out what it is. He glanced at the sun, now climbing higher in the sky. For now, though, let's get you somewhere safer. Pack what you need, we're going to town. To town, Olivia repeated incredulously. That's the first place Blackburn will look. Sometimes the safest place to hide is in plain sight, Kieran replied. Besides, I have friends there who can help keep an eye on you while I make some inquiries. Despite her reservations, Olivia found herself trusting the marshal's judgment. She quickly gathered her most essential belongings, including her father's journal and the small box of keepsakes her mother had left behind when she passed away years ago. As they rode toward Sakuro, Olivia couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and strange exhilaration. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing her troubles alone. The marshal rode beside her, alert and watchful, a steady presence in the uncertain landscape of her life. Little did she know that this journey into town was just the beginning of a much greater adventure, one that would test her courage, challenge her convictions, and perhaps even open her heart to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The ride into Sakuro was tense, with Olivia constantly scanning the landscape for signs of Blackburn or his men. Kieran rode slightly ahead, his posture relaxed but his eyes vigilant. Where exactly are we going? Olivia asked as they approached the town limits. To see a friend, Kieran replied. She runs a boarding house on the edge of town. It's a respectable place where you can stay while we sort this out. Olivia couldn't help the note of curiosity in her voice. Kieran glanced back with a slight smile. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, widow of a fellow marshal. She's helped me before when I've needed a safe place for witnesses. They turned onto a side street, away from the main thoroughfare, and approached a well-maintained two-story house with a small garden out front, an unusual sight in the arid landscape of Sakuro. A sign reading Rodriguez Boarding House hung by the gate. As they dismounted, the front door opened, and a woman of around 50 emerged, her dark hair streaked with silver, her bearing dignified and welcoming. "Kieran Gray," she said, hands on her hips. "It's been nearly a year since you last darkened my doorstep." "Been keeping busy, Alina," he replied, removing his hat as he approached. "Sorry to arrive unannounced, but we're in a bit of a situation." Alina's gaze shifted to Olivia, assessing her with kind but shrewd eyes. "I can see that. Come inside, both of you. No good having a conversation where prying eyes might see." Inside, the boarding house was cool and clean with simple but comfortable furnishings. Alina led them to a private sitting room and closed the door firmly behind them. "Now," she said, settling into a chair, "tell me what trouble you've gotten yourself into this time, Marshal." Kieran quickly explained the situation with Blackburn, while Olivia added details about the rancher's persistent attempts to force her into marriage. Alina listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Harold Blackburn," she said when they finished. "I've heard stories about that man for years. Nothing good. They say he came to New Mexico with nothing 20 years ago and now owns half the county. Men don't acquire that kind of wealth so quickly through honest means." "That's what I'm thinking," Kieran agreed. "There's more to his interest in Miss Winters' property than he's letting on." Alina turned to Olivia. "You're welcome to stay here, child. I have a room at the back of the house that's quiet and private. Blackburn wouldn't dare make trouble in my establishment, not if he values his standing in the community." "Thank you," Olivia said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "I won't be a burden." "Nonsense," Alina waved dismissively. "It's no burden to help someone in need. Besides, it gets lonely sometimes with just my regular boarders for company. Most of them are older gentlemen who work at the bank or the courthouse, respectable, but not exactly exciting conversationalists." The older woman rose. "Let me show you to your room. You can get settled while the marshal and I discuss some matters." Olivia followed Alina upstairs to a small but pleasant room with a window overlooking a courtyard garden. The bed was neatly made with a colorful quilt, and a pitcher of fresh water stood on the washstand. "This is lovely," Olivia said, setting down her bag. "It's not much, but it's clean and private," Alina replied. "The washroom is down the hall, and meals are served in the dining room at 7, noon, and 6. Feel free to use the garden if you want some fresh air. It's enclosed by walls, so you'll have privacy there too." After Alina left, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation washing over her. She was essentially in hiding, fleeing from a man who seemed determined to possess her by any means necessary. The thought was both terrifying and infuriating. She unpacked her few belongings, carefully placing her mother's small jewelry box and her father's journal in the drawer of the bedside table. The journal contained all of James Winters' thoughts and observations about their land, including his experiments with different crops and his plans for the future. It was all she had left of him now. Downstairs, Kieran and Alina were deep in conversation. "I've heard rumors," Alina was saying in a low voice, "about Blackburn's operations. Some say he's involved in more than just cattle ranching. There's talk of smuggling, perhaps even worse." "Any idea what he might be smuggling?" Kieran asked. Alina shook her head. "Could be anything from liquor to stolen goods. But whatever it is, it's made him powerful enough that even the local law turns a blind eye." "Sheriff Davis did seem unusually accommodating toward Blackburn when I spoke with him yesterday," Kieran observed. "Practically dismissed my questions before I could ask them." "Davis owes his position to Blackburn's influence," Alina confirmed. "You won't get any help from that quarter." Kieran leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "What about Olivia's father, James Winters? Did you know him?" "Not well," Alina replied. He kept to himself mostly. Decent man from what I heard. Worked his land, didn't cause trouble. He died suddenly, didn't he? That's what I gathered. Heart failure, according to the local doctor. But it's an interesting coincidence that Blackburn started pursuing Olivia so soon after her father's death. Alina's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You're thinking it might not have been natural causes. I'm not ruling anything out at this point, Kieran said grimly. Blackburn wants that land badly enough to try forcing a young woman into marriage. Makes me wonder if he'd go further than that. What's your next move? Alina asked. I need to look into both angles why Blackburn wants Olivia's land and whether these bank robbers I'm tracking have any connection to him. Could you keep an eye on things here? Make sure Olivia stays safe. Of course, Alina assured him. No one will bother her under my roof. Kieran stood, settling his hat back on his head. I'll be back by nightfall. If there's any trouble, any sign of Blackburn or his men, send word to me at the telegraph office. They'll know how to find me. After Kieran left, Alina went upstairs to check on Olivia, who was standing by the window, gazing out at the garden below. He's gone to gather information, Alina informed her. Said he'd be back by evening. Olivia turned, a hint of worry in her expression. Do you think he'll find anything? About why Blackburn wants my land so desperately. If anyone can uncover the truth, it's Kieran Gray, Alina said confidently. I've known him for years, ever since he worked with my late husband. He's like a dog with a bone. When he's on a case, doesn't give up until he has answers. How did you come to run a boarding house? Olivia asked, curious about this woman who had so readily offered her sanctuary. Alina smiled, a hint of old sorrow in her eyes. After Miguel, my husband, was killed in the line of duty, I needed something to occupy my time and provide an income. This house was too big for just me, and I discovered I enjoy having people around. It helps keep the loneliness at bay. I understand that feeling, Olivia said softly. Since my father died, the silence in our house has been overwhelming at times. Loss shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us, Alina said, patting Olivia's hand. Now, come downstairs when you're ready. I've put on coffee and you can tell me more about yourself while we wait for the marshal to return. Meanwhile, Kieran had ridden to the county records office, a small, dusty room in the back of the courthouse. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. Can I help you, sir? Kieran displayed his badge. Marshal Gray. I need to see the property records for a homestead just outside town. Belongs to the Winters family. The clerk blinked, then nodded hastily. Of course, Marshal. Just give me a moment to locate those files. As the clerk searched through cabinets, Kieran casually asked, Been working here long? Going on 15 years, the clerk replied with a hint of pride. Know every deed and title in Socorro County like the back of my hand. Then you'd know if there was anything special about the Winters property. Any disputes over boundaries or rights. The clerk paused, a file in his hand. Funny you should ask. There was some question a few years back. James Winters came in all excited, wanted to register an addendum to his deed, something about mineral rights if I recall correctly. Kieran's interest sharpened. Mineral rights? What kind? Don't rightly remember the specifics, the clerk admitted, handing over the file. It's all in there, though. Winters was quite insistent about documenting it properly. Kieran opened the file, scanning the papers inside. Most were standard property documents, but toward the back, he found what the clerk had mentioned, an official record, dated 3 years earlier, in which James Winters had legally established his claim to all mineral resources found on his land. Did Winters say what he'd found on his property? Kieran asked, still reading. The clerk shook his head. Not to me, but there were rumors. Some said he'd found a silver vein, others thought it might be copper. Nothing came of it though, at least not that I ever heard. Kieran made a mental note to check Olivia's father's journal later. If James Winters had discovered something valuable on his land, he might have documented it there. One more thing, Kieran said. Has anyone else been asking about these records recently? Perhaps reviewing the Winters property documents. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Well, Mr. Blackburn's lawyer was in just last week, spent quite a while going through that very file. And Mr. Phillips from the bank comes in regularly to check various property records. I see, Kieran said thoughtfully. Thank you for your assistance. I'll need to take some notes from this file if that's permitted. Of course, Marshal. Take all the time you need. After copying down the relevant information, Kieran returned the file and headed to his next destination, the local assay office. If there were valuable minerals on the Winters property, someone there might have knowledge of it. The assay office was small but well equipped, with scales, chemicals, and other tools for testing ore samples. The assayer, a middle-aged man with acid stains on his hands, looked up as Kieran entered. Afternoon, he greeted. Got samples to test? Not today, Kieran replied, showing his badge again. I'm investigating a matter that might involve mineral deposits on a local property, the Winters homestead. The assayer's expression changed subtly. Ah, James Winters. Yes, he brought in samples a few times. And what did you find? The man hesitated. I'm not supposed to discuss client's business. Kieran fixed him with a steady gaze. This is a federal investigation, Mr. Donovan, Thomas Donovan, the assayer supplied quickly. Well, in that case. Winters brought in some unusual samples about 3 years ago. Didn't look like much at first glance, but when I tested them, he paused dramatically, they showed significant traces of gold. Gold, Kieran repeated, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. How significant? Enough to make a man rich if he found the main vein, Donovan confirmed. Winters was excited but cautious, said he wanted to keep it quiet until he was sure of what he had. I never heard if he found more or not. Did anyone else know about this? Did Winters mention sharing this information with others? Donovan shook his head. Not that he told me, but... He lowered his voice. About a month ago, one of Blackburn's men came in with similar-looking rock samples, wanted me to test them for gold content. And did you? I did. They were from the same formation as Winters' samples. I'd bet my reputation on it. But I told him they were worthless. Something about the way he was asking, all secretive, like made me suspicious. Kieran nodded, impressed by the assayer's instincts. You did the right thing, Mr. Donovan. One last question, did you ever tell anyone else about Winters' discovery? Perhaps mention it in passing at the saloon or elsewhere. Donovan looked offended. Absolutely not. Professional confidentiality is sacred in my business, but... He frowned, thinking. Winters might have talked. He was pretty excited that last time he was here. Said something about how his daughter would never have to worry about money again. Thanking the assayer, Kieran left with a clearer understanding of Blackburn's motives. If James Winters had discovered gold on his property, that would certainly explain the rancher's determination to gain control of the land. And if Blackburn had somehow learned of this discovery, it might also explain why James Winters had died so suddenly and conveniently. The sun was beginning to set as Kieran made his way back toward the Rodriguez boarding house. He had one more stop to make, first the telegraph office, where he needed to send a message to his superior in Santa Fe, requesting information on Blackburn's business dealings and associates. As he rode through town, Kieran kept a watchful eye for Blackburn or his men, but saw no sign of them. That didn't mean they weren't watching, however. A man like Blackburn would have eyes all over Socorro, and by now, word of the marshal's interest in the Winters property would have reached him. The thought of Olivia waiting at the boarding house, trusting in his protection, created an unexpected warmth in Kieran's chest. There was something about her courage and determination that resonated with him. She could have accepted Blackburn's proposal out of fear or pragmatism, as many women in her vulnerable position might have done. Instead, she'd stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Kieran respected that kind of strength. It reminded him of why he'd become a marshal in the first place, to protect those who couldn't always protect themselves, to stand against the powerful who would prey on the vulnerable. But as he approached the boarding house, a sense of unease crept over him. Something wasn't right. The street was too quiet, and the lamps in the front windows of Alina's establishment were unlit. Though darkness was falling, drawing his revolver, Kieran dismounted and approached cautiously, listening for any sounds of disturbance. When he reached the front door, he found it slightly ajar, another bad sign. Alina was meticulous about security. Heart pounding, Kieran pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun, stepping into the shadowy foyer. "Alina," he called softly. "Olivia." A muffled sound from the back of the house drew his attention. Moving silently through the familiar layout, Kieran made his way toward Alina's private sitting room. The scene that greeted him made his blood run cold. Alina sat in a chair, a handkerchief pressed to a cut on her forehead. Across from her stood two men Kieran recognized as Blackburn's ranch hands. Of Olivia, there was no sign. "Where is she?" Kieran demanded, his revolver trained steadily on the intruders. The men whirled, reaching for their weapons, but froze when they saw Kieran's gun already aimed at them. "I wouldn't," Kieran warned. "Now, where's Miss Winters?" "Blackburn has her," Alina said, her voice shaking with anger. "These two and another broke in just after you left. They took her, Kieran. I tried to stop them, but—" She gestured to her injury. "Are you badly hurt?" Kieran asked, concern evident in his voice even as he kept his gun trained on the men. "Just a bump," Alina assured him. "But Olivia, they were rough with her. She fought, but they overpowered her." Kieran's jaw tightened as he turned his attention back to Blackburn's men. "Where did they take her?" The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. "You can tell me now," Kieran said evenly. "Or you can tell the judge after I charge you with kidnapping, assault, and interfering with a federal investigation. Your choice." "Blackburn's ranch," one of the men finally said. "He's planning to marry her tonight. Got the preacher there already." "A forced wedding isn't legal," Kieran pointed out. The man shrugged. "Legal enough if there's no one to say otherwise. Once it's done, who's going to believe the girl if she claims she was forced? Especially when Blackburn spreads word that she's unstable, grieving her father so much she doesn't know what she's saying." The cold calculation of the plan made Kieran's anger flare, but he kept his expression neutral. "You two are coming with me to the sheriff's office. Alina, can you send for Dr. Morris to tend that cut and then find Judge Hollister? Tell him what's happened and that I'll need arrest warrants for Blackburn and anyone helping him." "What about Olivia?" Alina asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm going after her as soon as I've secured these two," Kieran promised. "No way Blackburn's getting away with this." As Kieran marched the two men to the sheriff's office, his mind raced. Blackburn's ranch was over an hour's ride from town. If the wedding was planned for tonight, he didn't have much time to stop it. Sheriff Davis was predictably reluctant to hold Blackburn's men. But when Kieran mentioned the involvement of a federal judge, he grudgingly agreed to lock them up at least temporarily. "You're making a mistake crossing Blackburn," Davis warned as Kieran prepared to leave. "He owns this county." "Maybe he did," Kieran replied. "But things change, Sheriff. And kidnapping a woman to force her into marriage is a crime in any county, no matter who thinks they own it." Night had fallen completely by the time Kieran galloped out of Socorro, heading for Blackburn's ranch. The moon provided enough light to follow the main road, but Kieran knew he would need to approach the ranch carefully to avoid alerting Blackburn's men to his presence. As he rode, he thought about what he'd learned that day. Gold on the Winters property explained Blackburn's interest, but it also raised darker questions about James Winters' death. If Blackburn was willing to kidnap Olivia and force her into marriage, what else might he have done to get what he wanted? The Blackburn Ranch came into view after an hour of hard riding, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by well-maintained fences. Lights shone from the main house, and Kieran could make out several figures moving about. The forced wedding hadn't taken place yet, it seemed. Dismounting a safe distance away, Kieran tethered his horse and approached on foot, using the shadows and outbuildings for cover. As he drew closer to the main house, he could hear voices, one in particular rising above the others in protest. Olivia. She was alive and apparently still fighting. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by renewed determination. He needed a plan. Bursting in with guns blazing might get them both killed. Circling around to the back of the house, Kieran found a window partially open. Voices drifted out clearly. "You're only making this harder on yourself," Blackburn was saying, his tone a forced calm that barely masked his frustration. "The ceremony will proceed whether you cooperate or not. The preacher understands the situation." "The situation?" Olivia's voice was filled with scorn. "You mean how you've kidnapped me and are trying to force me into marriage against my will? Does the preacher understand that?" "Reverend Phillips understands that young women sometimes get confused about what's best for them," Blackburn replied, "especially when outsiders fill their heads with nonsense. The only confusion here is yours, if you think I'll ever be your wife in anything but name," Olivia shot back. "You may force this ceremony, but you'll never have my consent in any way that matters." A sharp crack sounded, the unmistakable sound of a slap, followed by a gasp of pain. Kieran's hand tightened on his gun, rage coursing through him at the thought of Blackburn laying hands on Olivia. "Enough." A new voice intervened, presumably the preacher. "I agreed to perform this ceremony because you assured me the young lady was simply nervous, not genuinely unwilling. I cannot and will not perform a marriage where the bride is clearly being coerced." "You'll do as you're told, Phillips," Blackburn growled. "Unless you want your brother to lose his position at the bank and his home and his reputation." The tense silence that followed told Kieran that Blackburn's threat had hit its mark. "Now," Blackburn continued, his voice regaining its false civility, "let's proceed. My patience is wearing thin." It was time to act. Kieran moved to the back door, finding it guarded by a single ranch hand who looked half asleep at his post. With swift, silent movements, Kieran came up behind the man, pressing his revolver against his back. "Make a sound and it'll be your last," Kieran whispered. "Now, nice and easy, drop your weapon and open that door." The guard complied, and Kieran followed him inside, keeping the gun pressed firmly against the man's spine. They moved through a kitchen and down a short hallway, toward the voices. In the main parlor, Kieran found exactly what he expected. Blackburn standing imperiously in the center of the room, Olivia seated in a chair with her hands bound before her, a red mark visible on her cheek. An older man in clerical garb, Reverend Phillips, stood uncomfortably to one side, while two more ranch hands flanked the doors. No one noticed Kieran and his captive at first, giving him the advantage of surprise. "Evening, folks," he called out, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Hope I'm not too late for the festivities." All heads turned at once. Olivia's eyes widened, relief and hope flashing across her face, Blackburn's expression darkened with fury. "Marshal," he spat, "you're interfering in a private matter." "Kidnapping is hardly private," Kieran replied evenly, keeping his gun steady. "It's a federal offense, as is assaulting a woman and attempting to force her into marriage. Reverend Phillips, I suggest you leave now unless you want to be charged as an accomplice." The preacher needed no further encouragement. With a mumbled apology to Olivia, he hurried past Kieran and out the back door. "You two," Kieran addressed Blackburn's remaining men, "drop your weapons and move to that corner." When they hesitated, looking to their employer for guidance, Kieran added, "I won't ask twice." "Do as he says," Blackburn ordered, surprising Kieran. "For now." The men complied, and Kieran motioned for his captive to join them. Keeping his gun trained on the three ranch hands, he moved carefully toward Olivia. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Nothing serious," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Just eager to leave this place." "That can be arranged," Kieran assured her, reaching down with his free hand to untie her bonds. "Mr. Blackburn and I have some unfinished business, but it can wait until you're safely away from here." Blackburn watched this exchange with calculating eyes. "You think you've won, Marshal?" "This changes nothing. I'll still get what I want in the end." "And what exactly is that, Blackburn?" Kieran asked, helping Olivia to her feet. "The gold on the Winters property? Or is it something else you're after?" A flicker of surprise crossed Blackburn's face before he controlled it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Kieran countered. "I think you learned somehow that James Winters had discovered gold on his land, and I think you decided that the easiest way to get your hands on it was to marry his daughter after he was conveniently out of the picture." Olivia gasped. "Gold? On our property? Father never said anything about. He was keeping it quiet until he was sure of what he had," Kieran explained, still watching Blackburn. "The assayer confirmed he brought in samples that tested positive." "Your father was planning to secure your future, Olivia." Understanding dawned on Olivia's face, followed by renewed anger as she turned to Blackburn. "Did you kill my father?" she demanded. "Is that why he died so suddenly when he was never sick a day in his life?" Blackburn's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove anything," he snarled. "And you never will. One marshal against me and all my influence in this county. You're outnumbered, Gray." "Maybe so," Kieran agreed calmly, "but I've already wired my superiors in Santa Fe. A full investigation into James Winters' death and your business dealings is now underway. Even if I don't make it back to town tonight, that investigation will continue." Uncertainty flickered in Blackburn's eyes for the first time. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Kieran replied. "Care to wager your future on that?" The standoff stretched, tension thick in the air. Then, with startling speed, Blackburn reached inside his jacket. "Gun!" Kieran shouted, pushing Olivia behind him as he fired. The shot echoed deafeningly in the confined space of the parlor. Blackburn staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, the revolver he'd been drawing clattering to the floor. "Stay where you are," Kieran ordered Blackburn's men, who had started forward at the gunshot. "Next one who moves gets worse than a shoulder wound." Keeping his gun trained on the group, Kieran backed toward the door, guiding Olivia with him. "We're leaving now. Anyone who follows will be considered a threat and dealt with accordingly." Once outside, they moved quickly to where Kieran had left his horse. "Can you ride?" he asked Olivia. "Yes," she replied, still shaken but determined. "But we only have one horse." "We'll manage," Kieran said, helping her up before mounting behind her. "Hold tight." They galloped away from the ranch, Kieran constantly checking behind them for pursuit. But no riders appeared on the road behind them, which only increased his unease. Blackburn wasn't the type to give up so easily. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked as they rode. Back to Sakaro for now, Kieran replied. Judge Hollister will be waiting. We need to get arrest warrants issued immediately before Blackburn can flee or destroy evidence. Do you really think he killed my father? Olivia's voice was small but steady. Kieran hesitated, not wanting to cause her more pain. I don't know for certain, he admitted. But the timing is suspicious, and Blackburn clearly knew about the gold. We'll investigate thoroughly, I promise you that. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound in the night. Olivia was warm against Kieran's chest, her hair occasionally brushing his face when the wind caught it. Despite the danger they were still in, Kieran found himself acutely aware of her proximity, of the trust she was placing in him. Thank you, Olivia said suddenly, for coming after me. For believing me when I said I didn't want to marry him. You don't need to thank me for that, Kieran replied. I was just doing what's right. Still, she insisted, most men wouldn't have interfered. They would have considered it Blackburn's right to pursue me however he chose. I'm not most men, Kieran said simply. No, Olivia agreed softly. You're not. They were about halfway back to Sakaro when Kieran heard the distant sound of multiple horses riding hard. He reined in, listening intently. What is it? Olivia asked, tension returning to her voice. Riders, Kieran replied grimly. Coming up fast behind us. Blackburn's men, I'd wager. What do? We can't outrun them on one horse. Kieran scanned the terrain. The main road offered no cover, but to their right, a narrow trail led into a stand of cottonwoods along the riverbank. This way, he decided, guiding the horse off the road and onto the trail. We'll try to lose them in the trees. The path wound through the cottonwoods, the moonlight filtering through the leaves to provide just enough illumination to navigate. The sound of pursuit grew louder. However, Blackburn's men had spotted their detour. They're still coming, Olivia said, her voice tight with fear. Kieran pushed the horse harder, knowing the animal was already tired from the long ride. There's a shallow place to cross the river up ahead, he said. If we can make it across, we might be able to hide our tracks. But as they rounded a bend in the trail, their path was suddenly blocked by two mounted figures. Kieran pulled his horse up short, immediately reaching for his revolver. That won't be necessary, Marshal, one of the riders called out, and Kieran was startled to recognize the voice of Sheriff Davis. We're here to help. Davis, Kieran replied skeptically. Last I checked, you were firmly in Blackburn's pocket. The sheriff moved his horse forward, his face becoming visible in the moonlight. Things change, he said gruffly. Judge Hollister paid me a visit after your lady friend Alina told him what happened, made me realize I've been looking the other way too long. The other rider moved up beside Davis, and Kieran recognized Alina's neighbor, a retired Army sergeant named Cooper. Got half a dozen men behind us, Davis continued. All good men who have had enough of Blackburn's tyranny. We're here to make sure you and Miss Winters get back to town safely. Before Kieran could respond, the sounds of pursuit grew louder and several riders burst into view behind them. Blackburn's men, Cooper identified. 6, maybe 7 of them. Get Miss Winters to safety, Kieran instructed, helping Olivia dismount quickly. Cooper, take her on your horse. Davis and I will hold them off. Olivia clutched at Kieran's arm. No, it's too dangerous. They'll kill you. Trust me, Kieran said, meeting her eyes steadily. I'll be right behind you. Go now, quickly. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia allowed Cooper to help her onto his horse. Be careful, she whispered to Kieran before they rode off, taking a different path through the trees. Kieran and Davis positioned themselves across the trail, weapons drawn as Blackburn's men approached. This ends now, Kieran called out when the riders were within earshot. Blackburn is finished in Sakaro. Turn back or face the consequences. The riders slowed but didn't stop. In the lead was Blackburn himself, his shoulder bandaged but his face contorted with rage. "You've cost me everything, Gray," he shouted. "I won't leave empty-handed. The girl knows where the gold is, and I mean to have it." "There's nowhere to run, Blackburn," Davis added. "Judge Hollister's issued warrants for your arrest. Federal marshals are on their way from Santa Fe. It's over." For a moment, it seemed Blackburn might actually consider surrender. Then, with a roar of fury, he drew his gun and fired. The shot went wide, but it triggered a barrage of gunfire from both sides. Kieran and Davis dove for cover behind trees, returning fire as Blackburn's men scattered, seeking their own protection in the dense cottonwoods. The skirmish was brief, but intense. When it ended, 2 of Blackburn's men lay wounded on the ground, while the others had fled back the way they'd come, all except Blackburn himself, who had somehow slipped away in the confusion. "He's gone after Olivia," Kieran realized with a sinking feeling. "He must have circled around while we were pinned down. Cooper will protect her," Davis assured him. "And they're headed straight for town where more of our men are waiting." "I'm not taking that chance," Kieran replied, already running to his horse. "Take care of the wounded." "I'm going after them." Mounting quickly, Kieran galloped through the trees, following the path Cooper and Olivia had taken. His heart pounded with a fear he hadn't felt in years, not fear for himself, but for Olivia. In the short time he'd known her, she had come to mean more to him than he'd expected or intended. The path emerged from the cottonwoods onto a stretch of open ground leading toward Socorro. In the distance, Kieran could make out 2 riders, Cooper and Olivia, moving at a fast trot. But behind them, gaining quickly, was a lone horseman that could only be Blackburn. Kieran urged his tired horse to greater speed, knowing he needed to intercept Blackburn before he reached Olivia. The distance between them slowly closed, but Blackburn was still ahead, now close enough to Cooper and Olivia that Kieran could see him raise his arm, taking aim. "Olivia," Kieran shouted, though he knew she couldn't hear him at this distance. "Look out." As if in slow motion, Kieran saw Blackburn fire, saw Cooper's horse stumble, saw Olivia fall as the animal went down. Cooper rolled clear, drawing his own weapon, but Blackburn was already upon them. Kieran pushed his horse to its limit, closing the final distance as Blackburn dismounted and strode toward Olivia, who was struggling to her feet. "You've caused me enough trouble," Blackburn was saying as Kieran finally reached them, leaping from his horse. "Now you're coming with me, and you're going to show me exactly where your father found that gold." "She's not going anywhere with you," Kieran declared, his revolver aimed steadily at Blackburn's chest. Blackburn whirled, his own gun still in hand. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Marshal?" "Neither do you," Kieran replied. "Drop the gun, Blackburn. It's over." For a long, tense moment, Blackburn seemed to weigh his options, his eyes darting between Kieran, Olivia, and the injured Cooper who had managed to position himself protectively near Olivia. Then, with startling suddenness, Blackburn lunged toward Olivia, attempting to use her as a shield. Kieran fired without hesitation, his bullet finding its mark before Blackburn could reach her. The rancher staggered, looking down in disbelief at the spreading red stain on his chest before collapsing to his knees. "You've ruined everything," he gasped, and then fell forward motionless. In the silence that followed, Kieran moved quickly to Olivia's side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though she was trembling visibly. "No, I'm all right, but Cooper, just a graze," the older man assured them, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding arm. "I've had worse shaving." Kieran helped Olivia to her feet, his hands lingering on her shoulders longer than strictly necessary. The relief he felt at finding her unharmed was overwhelming, making him realize just how much she had come to matter to him in their short acquaintance. "It's really over?" Olivia asked, looking down at Blackburn's body with a mixture of relief and residual fear. "It's over," Kieran confirmed. "Blackburn can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." As they made their way back to Socorro, Olivia riding with Kieran while Cooper followed on Blackburn's horse, leading his own injured mount. A weight seemed to lift from Olivia's shoulders. By the time they reached town, where Judge Hollister and a group of citizens awaited them, she was sitting straighter, her natural resilience reasserting itself. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Depositions were taken, evidence was gathered, and Blackburn's remaining men were rounded up. The investigation into James Winters' death was reopened, and though conclusive proof of murder was difficult to establish after so much time had passed, there was enough circumstantial evidence to suggest foul play. More importantly, Olivia's right to her land was firmly established, with Judge Hollister personally ensuring that all documentation was in order. The discovery of gold was confirmed by a team sent from Santa Fe, though the vein proved to be modest rather than spectacular, valuable enough to provide Olivia with financial security, but not enough to attract the kind of attention that might have put her in danger again. Through it all, Kieran remained in Socorro, extending his official duties to include overseeing the aftermath of Blackburn's downfall. But as the immediate crisis passed and normal life began to resume, he found himself facing an unexpected dilemma. His assignment in Socorro was coming to an end. The bank robbers he'd been tracking had been apprehended 2 counties over by another marshal, and with Blackburn's criminal activities now exposed, there was no reason for Kieran to remain. No official reason, at least. He found Olivia at her homestead on a warm afternoon, working in the garden her father had started. She looked up as he approached, a smile lighting her features in a way that made Kieran's heart skip. "Marshal Gray," she greeted him, setting aside her tools and brushing the dirt from her hands. "This is a pleasant surprise. I've come to say goodbye," Kieran said, removing his hat as he drew near. "I've been recalled to Santa Fe, new assignment." "Oh." The simple syllable contained a wealth of disappointment. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning." Kieran shifted, uncharacteristically uncertain. "But there's something I wanted to discuss with you before I go." Olivia tilted her head questioningly. "What is it?" "These past weeks," Kieran began, searching for the right words, "working with you, getting to know you. It's been unlike anything I've experienced before." A faint blush colored Olivia's cheeks. "It's been eventful, certainly." "More than eventful," Kieran corrected gently. "It's been important. You've become important to me, Olivia." The blush deepened, but Olivia met his gaze steadily. "And you to me, Kieran. More than I would have thought possible in such a short time." Encouraged, Kieran continued. "I've been thinking about my future. The life of a marshal means constant travel, never putting down roots. I've always accepted that as the price of the badge. But lately, I've been wondering if there might be another path." "What are you saying?" Olivia asked, hope and caution mingling in her voice. "I'm saying I don't want to leave Socorro, or rather, I don't want to leave you," Kieran admitted. "I've spoken with Judge Hollister. There's a need for a permanent federal presence in this area, especially with the gold discovery and the aftermath of Blackburn's operations. The judge has offered me a position as the district's resident marshal." Joy blossomed on Olivia's face. "And you're accepting?" "That depends," Kieran replied, taking a step closer. "On whether there's a reason for me to stay beyond professional duty." "What kind of reason did you have in mind?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper as Kieran closed the distance between them. "The kind that might start with courting and end with something more permanent," he said softly. "If you're amenable." In answer, Olivia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when she drew back, they were both smiling. "I'll take that as a yes," Kieran murmured, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Definitely a yes," Olivia confirmed. "Though I should warn you, courting a woman who owns a gold mine might be complicated." Kieran laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I think we can handle complicated, considering what we've already been through together." As they walked together toward the house, planning for a future neither had anticipated just weeks before, the setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, a fitting symbol, perhaps, of the new beginning they were embarking on together. In the years that followed, Sakura would remember the dramatic tale of how a determined young woman had stood against a powerful rancher's coercion, and how a principled marshal had stood with her, declaring simply but forcefully, she already said no. But for Kieran and Olivia, it was just the beginning of their story, a story that would include marriage the following spring, the birth of their son James a year later, and eventually the establishment of one of the territory's most respected family ranches. The gold mine on their property produced modestly but steadily, providing enough wealth to ensure their children's future while avoiding the destructive gold fever that had ruined so many lives throughout the West. More valuable than the gold, however, was the legacy of integrity and courage. They passed down a reminder that standing up for what's right, even against overwhelming odds, was the truest measure of wealth. And on warm evenings when the work was done and the children were asleep, Kieran and Olivia would often sit together on the porch of their expanded home, looking out over the land they defended together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Sakura?" Olivia would sometimes ask, and Kieran, taking her hand in his, would always reply the same way. "I don't need to wonder. Whatever path I took, I believe it would have led me to you." In a land as harsh and unpredictable as the New Mexico territory, certainty was a rare commodity. But of that one thing, Marshal Kieran Gray was absolutely certain and would remain so for all the days of their life together.